Welcome and welcome back to this channel. This is Jay from Alissa and Jay. Today I am excited to share some of my opinions about several different cameras and lenses that we had the opportunity to play with during the Zoom Camera Fair in Thailand. This fair happens every 6 months, once in March and again in October of every year. So if you're someone like me who likes to play with the latest and greatest cameras and lenses, and if you're staying in Thailand, you can consider visiting there. Since I have a lot to talk about, I split this entire experience into multiple videos. This video is just one part of the series of videos yet to come or already available in the playlist. You can check out this playlist called Zoom Camera Fair March 2024 in this channel. Now let's get to the content. In this video, we're going to talk about who Sony A9 Mark III is for. After using the camera for quite some time, not owning the camera, of course I cannot own this camera. This is like a $6,000 camera and I cannot afford $6,000 camera for a 24 megapixel camera. There is Canon R3 which can do more things for the same amount of money, and there is Sony A1 which has higher megapixels, and it's a much versatile camera compared to Sony A9 Mark III. And that's exactly why I want to talk about who this camera is for and who will actually benefit from the capabilities of Sony A9 Mark III. Of course, I don't own Sony A9 Mark III, or I don't want to own one because I'm not the kind of guy who would actually benefit from Sony A9 Mark III. And that would be the first part of reasoning to whom this camera is actually made for. And the second part of the reasoning is actually the global shutter. A9 Mark III is one of the fantastic cameras that Sony has ever made in the history of mirrorless alpha cameras. And I think the majority of the things the A9 Mark III has as an advantage over the other series of camera is actually the ergonomics, the design of the body, the amalgamation of the body style from Sony A7R5, the screen, and the dials from Sony A1, so which is fantastic in my opinion. It holds really good, but this camera is not for everybody, and there are two specific use cases and two set of professionals would actually benefit from using this camera, and the rest of the people have much more better options either from Sony or from other brands like Canon and Nikon. Okay, I have used this camera extensively over Zoom Camera Fair, Big Camera Fair, and in Sony showrooms. Yes, you can actually go to Sony showrooms and you can use this camera to your heart's content. I have stayed in the Sony showroom for like hours just to test out this camera, and you can do with any camera that's available in the showroom and lenses. You can test everything about a camera before you make your purchase, and I highly recommend you to do that if any other brand showroom is available in your area. So this is a very good thing that Sony offers, and in Thailand only Sony showroom is available. Nikon, Canon showrooms are not available, but if you want to test out those cameras, you might probably want to go to a place like Big Camera Store or Zoom Camera Store, and likewise. And sometimes they don't allow you to shoot photos because they are too much worried about the increasing shutter count in the camera. So you might have limited options in the resellers or distributors of these cameras. But Sony showroom, you can do anything you want. They don't care. Like, you can test it out. I even made a video testing out a particular lens, 600mm f4 lens. Okay, that's the most expensive lens Sony has, and I have made a video in the Sony showroom. Okay, so you don't have to make a purchase to use the camera and test it out. And I did test it out, and I'm really happy to tell people that A9 Mark III is an amazing camera, but most people wouldn't use the full potential of Sony A9 Mark III. The kind of people who would benefit from this camera are those professionals who would utilize that one frame when shot at 120 frames per second photos in RAW in 24 megapixel without missing a beat. Right? They would have an edge over the other photographers who are shooting at 30 frames per second, who might miss some photos, some frames, some instant, some moment. Only to have that edge over the other photographers, you might want to have this camera. right? That would be the reason why you want to shoot 120 frames per second to get that moment that other photographers might miss. So that's something. If you want to have an edge over the other photographers, you might want to use this camera. The second part to the first reasoning is also the autofocus capability. Oh my god. I'm extremely impressed and mind blown with the capability of Sony A9 Mark III's autofocus capability. Like, I was shooting my wife and she was just moving around and around, and every single frame is in focus on her eye, and I was mind blown. This is something I had never expected. I was expecting some missed frames. It's 120 frames per second continuous autofocus, and that's something that none of the other cameras have right now. Nikon offers 120 frames per second still images in 11 megapixel JPEG images, not RAW, not 24 megapixels. So you can think about how much better this one is for that specific use case. All right, Z8 and Z9 from Nikon does that, but this one does better. That's reason number one. Being able to have that advantage over other photographers who are shooting at 30 frames per second or even 60 frames per second, and the continuous autofocus nailing on the subject every single time. The second reason is the global shutter. Only for these two reasons you might want to choose this camera, but otherwise there are much better options in the market. Canon R3 is a great camera. It's got great video features. It can shoot 6K raw footages internally, and it's got better body. It only weighs like 800 grams. This one is already like 750 grams, so there's not big weight advantage when it comes to A9 Mark III in every other way. Other than the global shutter and the 120 frames per second, Canon R3 is a much better camera. It's got stack sensor as well. When it comes to Sony ecosystem itself, there are some alternatives you might want to consider. Sony A1 is a great alternative at the price point, and there are other Sony cameras that might be more versatile for you if you want to run and gun shooting landscapes, wildlife, weddings, etc. Sony A7R5 is a great camera for that as well. So please consider, for the price point of $6,000, you might not want Sony A9 Mark III. And most of all, even the seasoned photographers, seasoned wildlife and action sports photographers, they might not use 120 frames per second for a couple of reasons. Shooting 60 frames per second is already great. It's already giving you more advantage than most cameras in the market right now. You might not miss that one moment shooting that 60 frames per second over that 120 frames per second. And also you get the advantage of filling up the buffer slowly. You have the capability to shoot longer. Shooting at a lower frames per second has its own advantages, but 120 frames per second, if you need it, it's there in Sony A9 Mark III. So seasoned photographers, they might even stick with 60 frames per second in realistic scenarios. So this is something that will be very efficient for them as well. And there are so many things that need to be considered. And looking at the buffer clearance rate, it's kind of slow in my opinion. It's not as fast as camera that's using a CF Express Type B card, and that is a bottleneck in these Sony cameras. They are still sticking with CF Express Type A cards, and I want Sony ecosystem to shift to CF Express Type B card, and I don't know when that is going to happen. Okay, and if Sony were to shift to that, it's going to clear the buffer faster so that it can accommodate more shooting time. So that those areas have a lot of improvement that could go in if they convert to CF Express Type B. But for now, as a camera as a whole, A9 Mark III is fantastic, alright? But if you ask me if it's worth $6,000, I don't think so, honestly. Maybe $4,000, great. But $6,000, I don't think so. There are so many alternatives in the market that is worth the money, worth $6,000, and I don't think this is one of them. I know you guys might be roasting me in the comments saying that, hey, you don't know how much the technology is going to cost the manufacturers to come up with the R&D, come up with the global shutter and everything. Please go ahead, roast me, but I'm telling you right away, there are alternatives in the market, and realistically, I don't think if I have the capability of shooting 120 frames per second, I don't know how often I'll be shooting with 120 frames per second. So I don't know, if you are kind of a guy who shoots 120 frames per second every single time you click the shutter, please comment down below. I will please comment down below. I would want to see your use cases, so let's have it as an interactive video. All right, thanks for listening to this rant. Hope you have a great day. See you in the next video. Let me take a moment to tell you, Alissa and I, we love to travel, and we bring the beauty around the world to you in the form of travel vlogs. If you're interested in traveling and would like to know more about travel gears and itineraries, you should check out our playlist of countries and reviews. It will help you to understand your destination and what to carry during those trips. This is all free, and you can show us your support by watching those videos.
If you enjoy our content, whether it's travel vlogs or gear reviews, and would like to have access to our exclusive content, please support us on Patreon using the link in the description below.